Welcome to the first installment of the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group's 2026 Winter Webinar Series. This webinar series is designed to provide our community with updates about ongoing projects to monitor and manage nutrient pollution in Michigan's portion of the Western Lake Erie Basin. This winter series will continue until April 7th on alternating Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon, and you can find the full schedule on our website. My name is Allison Bressler, and I'm the program manager for the Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group. This community group works collaboratively with Michigan's quality of life agencies to inform how the state implements projects aimed at managing and monitoring phosphorus to improve water quality in Lake Erie. The Western Lake Erie Basin Advisory Group and the webinar series are generously funded by the Erb Family Foundation. Today, we welcome Megan Tinsley, the Water Policy Director for Michigan Environmental Council, a coalition of over 100 organizations working to champion lasting protections for Michigan's air, our water, and the places we love. Megan has experience working on environmental campaigns ranging from Everglades restoration to open space and farmland preservation to wildlife protections for nonprofit organizations. These include Audubon, Florida, and New Jersey Audubon. Megan earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in Biological Sciences from the University of Tennessee and holds a Master's in Marine Affairs and Policy from the University of Miami. Megan, I'll pass it off to you.
As Allison said, I'm the Water Policy Director for the Michigan Environmental Council, and she shared our mission. And just to let you know, we're a very sort of policy-based organization, so we are working to create policy change in Lansing, but we also have around 100 member organizations across the state, and they bring to us things that they see in their areas and help us affect change and also make us aware of things that we might not be know of that's going on in their area because we are very focused on statewide policy. So my focus is non-point source pollution, but we also have policy staff that work in climate and energy, urban infrastructure and transportation, public health and environmental harm, and chemicals such as PFAS. And so we're working on a variety of different issues. But since one of my areas is non-point source pollution, an issue that I've focused a lot on is septic tanks in Michigan. And as you all know, we lack a statewide code, which really it calls into question, I think, our state motto, Pure Michigan, and the vast amounts of money that go into advertising our unique outdoor opportunities in the state. So, clear rivers and streams that attract trout fishers and the lakes that attract boaters and swimmers and all these different things. But yet we see headlines like this, and I'll just scroll through a few. I mean, this is not new news, right? Like, this has been in the news again and again. There are a variety of lake systems that have suffered algal blooms, and just different effects that, of course, sometimes there's combining sources of whether it's nutrients or E. coli feeding into a lake. But in some cases where it's primarily residential, and, it's one of those communities where there's a lot of lakefront homes, not a lot of discharge or entrance from, watersheds that are having agricultural sources of those things. We can definitely look to and say that aging and failing septic systems are polluting our waters and harming public health. And sort of as a background, I wanted to go through how we got here. How is Michigan the last state in the nation to address this in any sort of comprehensive way? Yet we have plentiful evidence that these failing systems are impacting our waters. So to start, we have a slightly higher than average use of septic systems for household waste disposal. So the national average is around 25%. In Michigan. We're slightly above at 30% of residents relying on septic systems to handle their household waste. And even though in the 1970s, it was recognized way back then that failing systems would definitely have the potential to transmit diseases and cause economic blight, this has still remained unaddressed. And I think the thinking at the time was that we would transition to more sewer systems and we would have less use of septics as time went on, but that hasn't played out. So even newer construction in the state is continuing along that 30% use of septic systems. So that tr is true for new development as well. Overall, the age of housing in our state is quite old. So this is from actually the Eagle E. coli total maximum daily load document. Two-thirds of the housing units in Michigan were built before 1979, and systems that were installed in the 70s are now at the end of their useful lifespan. So typically 20 to 30 years a system is installed to handle waste appropriately. So because we have so many old houses, we know that there are a vast number of systems at the end of their lifespan. We also have a lack of public awareness in the state. So this is from a public sector consultant surveys where they surveyed some residents in mid-Michigan and found that approximately 30% didn't know that they had a septic system, and 43% indicated that they had not had their system pumped within the last 5 years. So the EPA recommendation for pumping is every 3 to 5, and an inspection every 1 to 3, just to make sure everything's working properly. And 25% of the respondents said they do not pump or maintain their systems on a regular basis. So we have this going on as well. And finally, as I mentioned, we have the lack of a statewide code. So, and if I presented this before, I've had, particularly people in the wastewater industry say, wait, we do have codes. Well, yes, local health departments have codes that say this is where you can place a system. This is how big it needs to be based on the use or the size of your home. There are things at the local level that prescribe the type of system that you might install, where you install it. But we do not have a way across the state to evaluate how the systems are performing. So yes, there are rules on certain things that have to do with specification and site, but we have nothing that's triggering a statewide or anything statewide that's triggering inspections of systems that are already installed, unless you happen to reside in one of these counties, 12 counties that have taken the step to do something on their level to make sure that there are at least some inspections happening of systems that are already installed. So there have been an addition of a couple counties since this map was created, but the green shaded counties are those that have some sort of inspection requirement. So it's typically timed to the sale of a home or a property for the inspection to be triggered. Grand Traverse is in italics because that's our latest county. It's actually just become effective, their inspection requirement this January. So that's the newest one that we have on the county level. That one will only trigger if the property being sold is within a certain distance of a water body. So it's a little more limited than some. And then just circling the Western Lake Erie Basin, we have Washtenaw and Wayne counties with time of sale ordinances, but we have the other counties in the Western Lake Erie Basin there that do not have any sort of septic ordinance. So just to take a look at where these ordinances are kind of sprinkled around the state. And as the text there says, and this is also from Eagle's total maximum daily load document, in most areas of Michigan, septic systems for single residences are only inspected when new systems are constructed or local permits are issued for repair or replacement. So when you take a look at the state and how many white counties there are, we have the vast majority of systems that are not being triggered for any sort of inspection. So to recap how we got here, we have a higher than national average use of septics in Michigan. We have an old housing stock with two-thirds of the systems at the end of their life. We've got this lack of public awareness around the need to inspect and maintain systems so that they function properly. And again, we have no statewide code that addresses maintenance or performance of systems. So what have we done about this? Where has the discussion been? Fun fact is that state legislation has been considered and debated. in Lansing longer than the traditional septic system is designed to last. So we've been talking about this for a very long time, but there's never been a solution that's stuck. And there have been multiple attempts over the years. So beginning in the 2001, 2002 legislative session, there was an attempt then. In 2004, Governor Granholm created this special water task force, and in doing so, she noted two very significant areas where Michigan was very behind other states. One is that we were not adequately protecting water quantity from diversions and withdrawals. And two, we were we were the only state in the nation to not have a statewide code. And what stuck out to me here is that that was in 2004. That was 22 years ago that we were the only state that did not have a statewide code. This just is not something that's happened within a 5 years. We have been lagging behind the rest of the nation for decades on this issue, which is astounding to me, considering, again, we bill ourselves as Pure Michigan and we have, our water, winter, wonderland license plates. And I mean, this is the picture that we paint for the rest of the world as to who Michigan is. And yet we are the last state to be able to do something about this. So we've had numerous bills with various approaches introduced over 9 different legislative sessions between 2001 and this year. We finally had, to my knowledge, this was the only passage by one chamber of any of the bills, happened at the end of the 2024 legislative session. So the Senate passed the bills that I'll talk about. And they were passed over to the House, but that particular session was coming to an end. And the House never considered the bills for various reasons. And we got incredibly close, and it was an incredible disappointment that we didn't get that across the finish line in 2024. But we are going back and trying again, and we're expecting this is good timing because we're expecting the introduction of a new bill in this legislative session, hopefully by this week. So if I had to summarize, sorry, I lost my slide. Why has this failed? I think, in this, a lot of this discussion predates my time, but I would boil it down at the high level as to a disagreement over reproach. So there are a couple different ways that states can have a statewide program. One is the time of sale or transfer program, it's sometimes referred to as TOAST. So this is when a system inspection occurs only when a property is sold or transferred. And then another approach is to have a system, no matter who you are or where you are, getting your system inspected and pumped if needed on a regular interval. So I'm going to go through some sort of benefits and different points about these approaches. So for the proponents of time of sale or transfer and all the counties that have passed their own measures, to my knowledge, are implementing a time of sale approach. And they have liked this approach because, for one thing, you have a property that is in a negotiation. So you've got a buyer and a seller. And then if the septic inspection turns up needing, there's a substantial repair that's needed, the system needs to be replaced or something incredibly expensive, that cost can be written into the negotiation and the ongoing transaction. So that has a real benefit for that approach. However, this approach is opposed by realtors. They do not want to feel that they are the septic police and sort of in charge of, these inspections getting done, being flagged to the county. And if there is a substantial problem discovered, that can lead to a loss of a sale or significant delays. So on the one hand, we have the counties that have been doing this, like it, certainly opposed by the realtors. Now, on the other side, the periodic or the interval, this would be the environmental community is more supportive of this approach because you're addressing all properties, right? Not just those that are up for sale. And I'll go through in a minute why that's so significant, especially for Michigan. So that's a benefit of doing the periodic approach. But The current legislation is calling for this type of approach, but has been very opposed by some counties and local health departments because they feel they do not have the capacity from a funding, staffing, and otherwise perspective to implement a periodic program. So I think every time this was tried, it fell apart for some reason. One session, I know there were bills that the environmental community was supporting, and then all of a sudden they were diluted to the point where we said we can't support this anymore. It's not going to fix the problem. I know I've heard of other attempts where the health departments were really left out of the negotiations and the discussions. And so every single time this has fallen apart. And it's just remained something that the state has failed to address on any significant scale. And the impacts to this, I know, as a member of this group, you're all aware, right? We're seeing algae blooms, we're seeing beach closures. Yes, we have contaminants entering from other places, right? So nutrients can be provided by uh, obviously farm runoff. It could be an overabundance of Canadian geese. It can be often and E. coli combined sewer overflows. So those high rainfall events that overwhelm municipal systems results in the release of this into the environment. But we do know that septic systems are contributing their fair share to the problems that we see around the state. So estimates of systems failing have ranged from 10%, which is what Eagle estimates, where we've seen some counties that have gone in and done inspections for a 10-year period of time. They have noted failure or a reason for corrective action in 27% of the systems that they inspected. So there is a range there, but it's substantially high. And the public sector consultant report said that if you look at these sort of failure rates, we're looking at 1 in 20 homes relying on septics outside of a sewer district that may be discharging waste directly into the environment. So that's like complete failure, 1 in 20 homes. I think that's particularly striking. And if we go with the Eagle estimate of 10% failure, that equates to 31 million gallons of raw sewage per day entering the environment. And then I think at least the failure rate is more of around 20%. In some cases, the 27 that I mentioned, we would see a doubling of that. So it's significant. And it shows. So you all probably know that we have a statewide total maximum daily load for E. coli. So routine testing has demonstrated that this E. coli, which is found in all mammal gastrointestinal tracts, is in our waters, in waters that exceed water quality standards. And that requires the development of a total maximum daily load. Because this is so widespread, it didn't make sense for Eagle to come and develop an individual plan for each water body because this is so widespread. So they developed a statewide E. coli total maximum daily load. And the goal of that is to meet standards for total and partial body contact, meaning those waters should be safe for contact through your skin, through just recreational contact and swimming. So here, this is the map that shows in the yellow areas are already approved for the E. coli TMDL. So those are places where we know the levels are already exceeding water quality standards. And then the green are those that they probably added in 2024 when they did an addendum. So they were expecting this to grow to 37,000 miles or half of Michigan streams being impaired for total or partial body contact for E. coli. And we also know from research, right? So we don't know in all of those cases on the Eagle map that those E. coli levels are contributed by septics. We can't piece that apart. But there are ways to know if E. coli is originating from the human gastrointestinal tract because it's a different species and there's different markers. So Joan Rose from MSU, along with these colleagues, did a study where they looked at 64 river systems in the Lower Peninsula, which composed of 84% of the drainage area, and they found fecal markers in that many of those waters. And they also did these tests during different times of year, and they saw the same results in the fall when flow from streams is less because we're at a drier time of the year. So they're still picking up these fecal markers, which means that this waste is making it into groundwater because it's groundwater flow that shows up in the rivers during that time of year. So this was a very significant study. And sewage contains over 100 viruses. Certainly, there's a lot in there to make people sick. And in watersheds with greater septic use, they did find greater concentration of the human fecal markers. Now, there have been studies, and I haven't seen this in Michigan, but I did see this study, and Joan Rose cites this as well, where there was septic density linked to illness in children in Wisconsin. This particular community had a community sort of doctor office so that all of the children were reporting to one central location, and they were able to detect high incidences of diarrhea when they occurred kind of from across many different families. And they found that 20% of the viral diarrhea and then 19% of the bacterial cases could be associated with the density of the holding tank systems nearby. So there has been this association between illness and septic system density. And the recommendations there was that this should be associated or looked for this association in other areas, and that we need to have standards for septic systems to protect public health. So all of this, now moving into the two different sort of approaches here, back to that. We feel that we really need a statewide approach, right? So we have 12 counties out of our 83 that have done something about this. We've also had counties that have had programs that repealed them. And that is why I feel like a statewide approach is definitely the way we need to go. So Barry Eaton County, they had their time of sale program for 10 years, did 10,000 evaluations, and that's where the 27% failure rate was documented. This is a really good report. And at the same time they were testing wells, they found coliform in several hundred wells and nitrates in over 100. And nitrates are associated with significant human health risks, particularly for babies. So there were violations that were found when they were over the 10 years when they were doing this program. They found things such as illicit discharge, no sewage system at all. So pipes that were hooked up from the home, discharging directly into agricultural drains or directly into creeks. And sometimes a homeowner could be renting that particular property and have absolutely no idea that that was going on. And there was illness in a child in one of those properties that was documented during this time frame, where the sewage discharge was actually on the property where the dog and the child played. Even with all of that evidence, the county still repealed the program in 2017. And I think that's the best illustration of why this needs to be done on a statewide level. So the periodic approach would get us to a routine integral inspection for all systems. And this is not far out of left field. This is what is recommended by the EPA. I mentioned the recommendation is inspections every 1 to 3 years, pumping every 3 to 5. So currently we're stuck in this place in Michigan where it's just out of sight, out of mind. You build a home and has a septic, that's all you need to do, you're good to go. And time of sale ordinances, because they only address the properties that are going up for sale, it does not move the needle at all on public awareness of getting to the point where people realize, yes, I have a septic system, it needs to be maintained. And for Michigan in particular, trying to enact a time of sale ordinance would be less effective because you see we're a darker purple state there. We have a higher percentage of people staying in their homes for longer. So 24 years or more, 38% of Michigan homeowners stay. And we know particularly the homes and the cottages and things around Lakeside, those tend to stay within the family, right? So you're not going to catch those systems by having a time of sale ordinance. So we're 11th in the nation for keeping homes within, the same family. And then this is also changing over time across the nation. So particularly when you look at that jump during the COVID years, we have the median length of home ownership, going to 13. 2021, it was holding at 13 years. So that was COVID, that was the real estate market, and also the aging population. People are just staying put. So we have continued to advocate for an inspection program that happens on a periodic basis. And I'm going to go over some of the legislation highlights from the previous session. And these are very much the same. The bill isn't introduced this session, but these points are largely the same. So what one of the bills does would it amend the public health code to require inspections on an integral basis, but it provides for a very generous ramp up of time and prioritizes the riskiest systems first. And I'll get into this a little bit more when I talk about some opposition to the legislation. It sets requirements for inspection. It defines what a failure is. It requires evaluation reports, and it also sets fines for noncompliance. The companion bill established a technical advisory committee to sort of evaluate standards and guidance for the management of these things, and also to look at things like, well, what about alternative systems? Because not every, soil type, not every property is the same in Michigan, and it's not a one size fits all thing. You have to customize the septic system that you install to a certain extent. And this technical advisory committee, which would be composed of a variety of members, some appointed by the governor, some the legislature, some representing health departments, environmental community, and trying to cover all the bases of input there. And this would direct the department, Eagle, to promulgate rules that would establish the code. That's the basis of the legislation. Now, I'm going to go through some challenges, and here's one. Okay, so this is a common thing that we hear. Certain places and areas and certain representatives that I talk to say that their residents will just never support the government coming onto their property to inspect their septic system. So property rights do remain a barrier, but I'm going to go through a significant list of things that have come up during the comprehensive stakeholder process that the bill sponsors. Senator Singh, Senator Skaggs from last session undertook very deliberate and inclusive stakeholder meetings in order to shape this legislation to get it to a place that it could be supported and implemented. So some of the challenges and the reasons for opposition that have come up is, again, as I mentioned, insufficient funding for health departments. So they feel they don't have the additional staff to hire to carry out the program, to track who's in compliance, who's not in compliance. A lot of times they don't even know where the septic systems are. So if it was a home that predated any sort of septic code on the local level, they might not know where the system even is, let alone if it's been inspected. Now, I will say here that it is not the burden upon the county to go out and inspect all of these properties. That can be done by a third-party inspector, and in many counties it is. There are septic system companies that do this inspection, and then they send the report to the county. So that's not on the county necessarily to do all of that inspection work, but they will be tracking and monitoring the systems that are inspected and not. There's significant concern about capacity for the health departments. So I know some health departments in the northern part of the state have vacancies for sanitarians or other sort of positions. They can't fill the vacancies. They get no qualified applicants. That's been a significant concern. The lack of knowledge of the existing systems, like I mentioned, we don't exactly know where they are always. The counties that like the time of sale or that are doing the time of sale, they want to keep doing it the way that they've done it. And to their credit, if they've been doing time of sale for 2 decades, they will have caught a lot of systems. So there's that feeling too, like, hey, what we're doing is working. Don't make us stop. So this I mentioned, also capacity and locations for this waste. So once the septic waste is pumped, it's either taken to a wastewater treatment facility that can and will accept it, or it can be applied to land. That's a permitted activity. You have to have a permit to do that. But there are many wastewater treatment facilities that either can't or won't take the waste. And complicating matters is that now we know that PFAS is in the septic waste. So that's just one more sort of wrinkle in things and why a wastewater treatment facility would not want to accept that waste. Property rights that I mentioned, and also there's this feeling that, well, the state can't tell every county and, they can't tell all of us what to do a certain way because we have, this county has different soils than this county. So these are kind of all of the things that have come up again and again, as reasons why we can't do this as Michigan. But I would say to that, and I'm going to get through like how the legislation addresses these things. 49 other states have figured out how to do this. So all of the things that I've shaded in green here, the challenges and reasons for opposition that I just discussed, these are things that I believe the legislation addresses because the main sort of thing that the legislation does is it gives a significant time until there will be any inspection that happens as a result of the legislation passing. And when I say significant time, I'm talking about 13 years. Okay. So there will be that technical advisory committee that meets, develops a report, directs Eagle to promulgate rules. The fastest time frame that can probably happen is I would say 3 years at its best. It takes time to properly notice, promulgate rules, and to do all of the things that the technical advisory committee would do. And the legislation says only 10 years after the department, Eagle, promulgates those rules, an inspection will happen. And it is a very narrow subset of systems that we will address first. So it has to be 20 years or older for that inspection to be triggered and either be located 500 feet within surface water or a critical dune or a 100-year floodplain or have no record of construction permit. So that on-ramp, that significant 13-year time period is more than sufficient, in my view, to address things like the capacity for the health departments, the lack of knowledge of existing systems. A database is something that we could be working on, and in fact, we've been advocating for funding to do so for Eagle for 2 years. The inability to fill positions and a declining workforce. We have sponsors of the legislation from last session that are very interested in helping to develop a workforce training program. Capacity and locations of disposal of waste. We need this anyway. 13 years, we can figure out how to develop some plants to accept this waste. The phase out of existing time of sale programs, that was solved by basically allowing counties to keep their time of sale programs if they have them, because we don't want to lose, like we don't want to phase those out while the 13 years is, going by to get this program ramped up. We want those counties to keep doing that. So they would not have to phase out their programs as long as once this program is up and running, what they're doing is comparable. So eventually they will start adding those properties that aren't necessarily up for sale, but they get to keep what they're doing. And the state, being too diverse for one size fits all, that's, what part of what the technical advisory committee will do will be to look at the alternative systems, to look at, what sort of systems should there be in areas with this soil type, because it will pull the people with that expertise to help develop those rules. So in my view, because of the stakeholder process that's been occurring since 2023, these points are addressed. The property rights, government overreach, there's always going to be the contingent of people that don't believe anyone should ever come on their property to look at anything. But in my mind, if that property is potentially risking the drinking water well of the neighbor next door, then it's time that we say this is a public health issue and septic systems need to be inspected. So taking a closer look at the opposition. There are 19 counties that I'm aware of. There could likely be more that have passed resolutions that opposed the 2023-2024 legislation. I highlighted Hillsdale because they're in the basin. But all of these counties, right, were speaking to their representatives saying, we can't do this. This is an overreach. We don't have the money, and on and all of those things that I mentioned. And when the bills did pass the Senate, it was a party line vote, so Democrats voting in favor, no Republicans in support. And I will say that when a lot of these counties passed these resolutions, the way the bills started out last session was at a 5-year interval. And that is not um, that is not excessive because that is that's the upper limit of what the EPA recommends. Um, but we knew at starting at 5, right? That's the way policy works. There's a lot of give and take. So many versions. I think there were at least 11 versions of this bill last session. Then the interval went to 10, and then it went back down to 7, and now it's back up at 10. So many of these counties, sorry, my computer's trying to run an update. That passed this, we're probably looking at a version of the bill that has since drastically changed. So next steps from the legislative and budget standpoint. So we're expecting a bill introduction this session, right? So the old bills died with the end of the last legislative session in 2024. The new bill is like all of the points that I went through, except now instead of 2 separate bills with the technical advisory committee and the code parts in a separate bill, they're combined into one. There has continued to be this extensive stakeholder engagement. And I mean, everybody's been at the table. The counties, the health departments, the septic haulers, the inspectors, the environmental community. I mean, it's really been a wide, group, and that's one of the reasons this process has taken so long. But I believe that that is the reason that we finally at least got the bills passed through one chamber last session, is because it was very deliberate and inclusive. So expect one bill. I don't know the number yet because it's not officially introduced. What will happen in the House? There could be a couple things that happen. They could, if the Senate passes the Senate bill, that could move over to the House for consideration. Or the House sponsors that were the sponsors last session could decide, you know what? There's a few things that I liked in the House version better. Let's introduce the House versions and let's see where we get. Let's see if we can kind of bring the 2 bills together and strike a compromise on some of the outstanding things. Then there would be committee hearings. And, hopefully, my hope is that legislation would pass implementing the statewide code that would require a routine and interval inspection. And then lastly, the legislation is only part of it. One of the big sources of opposition is this lack of funding. So we've been working for years to try to secure appropriations for grants for low-income residents to be able to fix their systems. I mean, that was one of the reasons that the Barry-Eaton County time of sale program was repealed. Residents came and they said, look, we cannot afford these repairs. So we know affordability is a tremendous issue. We were successful in getting some money set aside a couple years ago that went into a low interest loan program for residents to be able to repair and replace their systems, but only qualifying, those folks that can actually qualify for a loan are unable to access that funding. We still need grants for those residents that are not able to afford the repairs or to take out a loan to do so. We continue to advocate for that every budget cycle. And we've also been asking for specific funding to begin that septic database so we can better have a sense of where the systems are. And so, in my view, Michigan has failed, really failed on this, being the water state that we are, and, recognizing that we have this outdoor recreation economy that's worth 10 billion. And yet in 2024, 71% of Great Lakes beaches has at least, one day with bacterial risk for swimmers. Certainly many beaches have much more. And this affects property values too. I just came across a study last night that was recently done that noted in Michigan, E. coli outbreaks do have an impact on housing prices by at least 8.9% within 1 mile of an E. coli outbreak. And that can get better as the outbreak subsides, but these are real impacts. So if you would be so inclined, I'm going to open this up for questions, of course, but if you're thinking, you know, well, what can, this is important to me. I think this needs to get done. What can I do? And I would just say encourage your local government, both your county and also your state representatives that we need a statewide solution. This is not happening if only 12 out of 83 counties are doing anything about this. Those resolutions of opposition are very impactful to members. So it would be wonderful to have counties that actually support doing this on a statewide level. And for those, if you happen to live in one of the counties that oppose this officially, it would be great to do some outreach there and say, you know what, the interval it's not 5 years anymore, it's 10, and you have 13 years to figure out how, as a county, you're going to do this. And show them economic data, the decrease in property values when we have E. coli outbreaks. There's a great deal of education that needs to be done, and your family, friends, and neighbors can be part of that. And of course, this goes without saying, but properly maintaining any of the septic systems that you own is important as well. So again, I just want to thank you for your interest in this topic, and thanks for joining today. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thanks, Megan.